Greg, it is an honor to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So my husband Aaron and I have read Essentialism many times. Really helps us to recenter, refocus on what matters. And now after reading Effortless, I know that we need another one of these like quarterly offsites that you talk about to get refocused again, because there is so much more to take in and to look at it all again. So congratulations on this new book.
Well, thank you. I'm so pleased that you've had a chance to read it and that it's made you think. It sounds like, and I hope it's useful both to you and of course to the listeners.
Indeed. I not only made sure to read it, I was like, I really want this to be an opportunity just to synthesize and take it in for myself, really think about things as I went. And so just built in that extra time and space to allow it to have a little bit of breathing room inside as I was going through it. And I finished it this morning with a surprising kind of emotional moment of like tears in the last, I guess it was the conclusion where you're talking about your daughter. So it definitely has had an impact on me already. Your message is really universal.
So what I heard you say was that the book in a way surprised you, that not so much that you enjoyed it, because I think you thought you were hoping to enjoy it, but it was more emotional. It hit you in a different place than you expected it to. That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, I don't know if I was completely surprised that it would do such a thing, because I think what you speak about is so meaningful. And, you're talking about living a meaningful, purposeful life, being intentional about that. And that is something that I care deeply about. And so when you bring that to a very personal level, and you mention 14-year-old daughter, which my daughter is 14 years old right now, then it connects with me in that way that is more that heart change that you also talk about. That connection with the personal allows it to really take hold in a different kind of way.
Yeah, and you have just come out of that experience. You've had an experience. So you come at this conversation not just, I checked the box, I read it because we have the conversation today, but you come out of it actually feeling something, experiencing something, and at a deeper level than just I read a book. And I'm very pleased to hear that, because I mean I never have thought about my work as productivity, even though I'm not in any way anti-productivity. I just don't feel like that's actually what I'm trying to say. And one of the reasons is because I feel like there's deeper messages. And in this book, perhaps even especially, I feel like there is like an emotional thread running through it. It grew out of, emotional experiences, painful experiences. And so I feel myself especially when I was very, very first talking about it with people, when they hadn't read anything, I was just trying to even get words out. I felt emotional myself about it, which felt different than when I wrote Essentialism. So Effortless has, there's something else going on with it.
You start the whole book off talking about the exponential attention you got after writing Essentialism. And so you were doing all this speaking. How did that impact what you decided the next message needed to be?
Well, there were two things happening at the same time. One was this unparalleled listening tour, multi-year journey of people sharing with me their most essential things and wanting to talk about those things and being vulnerable in sharing those things. So I've learned more, just an unbelievable amount about that subject with people I mean, the world over now. And so I've just found that real privilege and learned a very particular lesson. It's that people really do believe that the more important something is, the harder it needs to be, or it will be. And it's just taken for granted. If you start an important, big new initiative, if you have something that really matters to you, you say, well, yes, it's going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to take a lot out of us. I don't know if I can even do this, but I would love to achieve this big thing, this amazing thing. And I remember even one person after reading Essentialism said, I mean, basically, look, this is a life-changing book for me, but it should come with a warning. This will be the hardest thing that you will ever do. And for a while, I just bought into that. I even used that quote and shared it with people as if it was sort of the way to think about this. Well, it's good. It's going to be worth it, but it's going to be so hard. And I don't believe that anymore. I think you have to separate those ideas. And that separation began for me personally when I just realized I am stripping away everything that's non-essential. And I don't mean perfectly. I make mistakes on this all the time, every day. But I am intentional, and I am trying to live what I teach. And I see it as a disciplined pursuit of what is essential. So I had stripped away. I wasn't writing another book. I mean, in publishing terms, you're supposed to do one every sort of 18 months. And there are many thought leaders that do that. And it's not like I don't have ideas or a desire, but I just was saying, no, be careful. A workshop business, that could be something. There's a great demand. There always has been for that. Nope, not going to do that. Put aside as a class I co-designed at Stanford, could have continued to do that. No, let's pause all of this. I mean, those are quite big things for me not to do in order to be able to have time for the things I felt were essential, which was to teach and write professionally, but also now I was the father of 4 children, and so to really be there for them and to be intentional in that way as well. And I just started to find myself seeing cracks in a theory that I'd held on to before. And the theory is summarized as the big rocks theory, right? So big rocks theory is you have a big container, you put in the sand first, then the small rocks, then the big rocks. It doesn't fit. It's a geometric problem. If you change the order, if you put the big rocks in first, then the small rocks, then the sand, it all just filters in and it fits, and that's marvelous. And that's how it's supposed to work, big rocks theory. But I started to find myself saying, yeah, but what if there's just too many rocks? And I don't know what it is about that question, even now when I ask it to you. I'm responding now in a meta way to it, because that was my personal story. That was what was a struggle for me. But also, as I say it, I just feel like it's almost like I can hear or feel like a collective pain that there are so many people right now who have too many big rocks. And you just think about, we're on the edge of the transition out of the pandemic, we all hope, but it's been more than a year now that we've been in the pandemic. Think of what that has been. Of course, there's been advantages, but for some people, for maybe a majority of people, they've achieved what they have through a sort of grinding effort. I was just talking to Eve Rodsky, who has a statistic that 153% increase in invisible work for working women over the pandemic period. But that just means too many big rocks. Well, what do you do in that situation, really? That's not a question of stripping out non-essentials. Let's say you've done it. Let's say you are putting the essentials first, but what if it's still too much? What if the responsibilities are still too overwhelming? And so do you put down the rock? Do you say, well, this essential relationship, no, forget it? You say that my personal health, no, not going to bother with it. A lot of people do deal with the problem that way. And I just started to, in the midst of a personal crisis, on top of that already feeling of too many big rocks, then suddenly had a personal crisis, the health of my 14-year-old daughter, that has been a multi-year challenge. And suddenly you say, okay, well, you either have to give up on what's essential, or you have to find a new way to do those essential things. Not just enough to know what the right things are, you've got to do them in the right way. And that's what the Effortless is about, is if you can find a way to make the essential things the easiest things. What if you could make them far simpler? What's possible? It could change everything. And in my experience, it does change everything.
So we have to get right to it then. What does it look like? Or what is one of the key things that you talk about making things lighter?
Yeah. So a few years ago, we moved to an idyllic area. It was so beautiful, actually, and it's like built in the 1950s, and then like the world moved on, but no one told anyone here. And so it's like white picket fences, there's horse trails, there's no street lamps, and our 4 children just seemed to just thrive. I mean, they were just out in nature every day, especially my daughter Eve, who is just always up trees, running barefoot everywhere. She's naming all the chickens. She's playing with her dog. She's going on walks. She's horse riding. I mean, and she's just such a particularly unique personality. Always has been. A just love of every animal. Her favorite book is James Herriot. It's a series. She's read those many times. She writes a journal every night. She's very she's articulate, and voluminous. I mean, I remember on a trip when I often would take one of my children when we was traveling, and on one trip we were like an hour and a half in, and I text my wife Anna, and I like, Eve has not stopped talking in an hour and a half. It's like, it's just completely, but it's scintillating and it's interesting and it's excited, and that is who, that is Eve. And then she turned 14, and she just seemed to slow down a bit. Like just take a little longer to do her chores, speak a little less to us. It seemed a little awkward physically, but we're like, well, it's pretty age appropriate behavior. That's what people would sometimes say about their teens. So probably okay. We took her to a routine physical therapy appointment for something minor, but the therapist just took my wife aside afterwards, and she said, well, Eve didn't pass this reflex test. And the whole point about reflex tests, as an aside, is like, they're not conscious. So it's the whole point. You're just making sure unconscious systems are working. Well, it wasn't. And he said, look, I just think you probably want to go to see a neurologist, and you don't have to get told twice. And so that once we had that thought, that question, we suddenly saw the behavioral change as in a different light, through a different lens, and of course felt the burden that possibly something was much more serious going on. And it was, I mean, her capabilities were in a total free fall. Like literally every day you could see her physically becoming incapable of things that she had always done her whole life. So it was just like taking somebody's abilities and just turning them way, way back. It like just super slow motion.
So literally take as a parent.
Yeah, well, it's the stuff that agony is surely made of. I mean, she just took hours to eat one meal. She would take, literally, I have a recording of her writing her name, and it took her 2 minutes to write out her full name. And that is very slow, right? You can't, if you had to try and do that yourself, you'd feel very impatient doing it. She was very pleasant through all of this. She didn't become in any way aggressive or anything like that, but it was a total personality change. She just could only answer in one word sentences. Really, her emotions became kind of muted or almost non-existent. And all the while, we're meeting with neurologists pretty much not every day, but we're regularly meeting with neurologists of different experts within their field. I remember that every test came back within the normal range. So One of them just sort of shrugged his shoulders. He's just like, yeah, so you're watching your child basically within maybe over a period of 2, 3, 4 months be well on the way to becoming completely comatose, like actually fall into a coma, and no one can tell you anything about why or what to do about it. So there's no treatment because there's no diagnosis. There is nothing. And so in the midst of this, right, both as I share that story, it's not like I think, oh yes, life is easy. Like clearly it's not. Life can be incredibly hard, and is for many people on many issues, right? Relationships are hard, and health challenges like this are hard, and things you can't control are hard. I mean, there's so many things that are hard, but we still, even within that context, felt like two paths open up before us. And it was like there were these two options. You could either, in this moment, you could take the harder path, the heavier path, or the easier and lighter path. And it might seem so obvious, like, well, take the easier, lighter path. But actually it wasn't at all, because the way that we just, our view of the world, you're supposed to work hard, you're supposed to get into it, get on with it. And you think that every it's like Box of the Horse in George Orwell's Animal Farm. Every problem, every setback, he said, well, I will work harder. But actually, in his case, in that fictional book, it makes all the problems worse. And so in this case too, the temptation is, or even this, the first thing you think to do is, well, we're going to pull all-nighters. We're going to, we are not going to leave any rock unturned. We're going to look at alternative medicines. We're going to scour the world. Every email people send to us, well-intended family, friends, extended. Maybe she has this issue. Oh, let's study all that. Let's look at all the symptoms within that. These are like life, threatening conditions of all sorts. Let's try and become an expert in all of them. I mean, there's a part of you that thinks that's what you should do. And fortunately, there was just this glimpse of this idea of like, just, you could have taken the lighter path. I felt really inspired to read an article. It's by Gordon B. Hinckley, president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he's passed away years ago. And I hadn't thought about this article for the longest time, but it's about optimism. And I share that because I think it is part of really what opened up this possibility. It's about happiness and optimism. And I felt like I should read that every day. And I did for the 4 months that she was going through this total discombobulation. And almost every day I managed to do that. And it seemed to rewire my mind. Everything within me was going down this heavier path, this path of that I just described. That's what you wanted to do, but there was this other counterforce that said, there's a lighter way, there's an easier way. You can have faith in this. You can do the small and simple things. You can get around the piano and sing. You can be grateful. Just be grateful for every single thing that's going right, everything, and say it explicitly. Find each other in our family culture. What are you doing right today? Anything, the smallest thing. And what we found is that as we did those small things, as we leaned into this sort of lighter path, this different way of living, that actually the culture responded immediately. It was almost like a magical force, and everything just seemed, it's like we didn't change the big problem, but it was just lighter. It was more possible. It wasn't so burdensome. It meant that the family culture actually came together. And I would describe the experience as a whole as one of joy. And I don't use that word lightly, but that is what it was. And what I feel like was being, I suppose, revealed to us through this extremity was there really is a different way. It's not like a nice idea. It's not just like, there is a different path. There's a different way to do life. And previously I had been like the weightlifter who's lifting with their back, they're doing it the wrong way, or the you know, I'm trying to knead bread as a baker by hand instead of, well, well, maybe we get a machine that can do that. Find a simpler path, an easier path. And that was one of the things I learned, is that no matter what's gone on in your life, every moment we're in, no matter what's going on, no matter how hard or challenging, you have a choice. You can take the heavier path or the lighter path. And that led me on this journey to find the principles and practices that first would be able to enable our family to do what was essential without burning out, but also then to be able to share it with other people, whatever the challenges they're facing. And it's very important that we do it. It's a noble pursuit to find an easier way to do what matters, because one, you can then do even more important things that seem impossible start to be doable, achievable, even effortless. We think of what would happen if the things that are essential, important, valuable were suddenly much, much easier than they were before. Think of all the good that we can do. And so I feel both, there's a message here for people that are burned out, on the edge of it, or well past it. But there's also a message for people that just feel like, oh, there's a great mission for me to achieve. I'm not burned out, but I don't think that's really possible. Because either way, wherever you are on that journey, the principles and practices of Effortless have relevancy for you right now. How can you make it easier today and tomorrow?
Thank you for sharing that story. It is really powerful. You talk about the effortless state on page 26. The effortless state is one in which you are physically rested, emotionally unburdened, and mentally energized. Right. You are completely present, attentive, and focused on what's important in that moment. You are able to do what matters most with ease. So when I read this, I could immediately relate to that moment. Like, I know what that feels like to be in that state.
Right.
However, I only know what it feels like to be in that state about 5% of the time.
Right.
And so my question is, when you want to be in that state more often, I mean, what is even a reasonable amount of time? You know, like I said, 5%, you know, I think the same thing with essentialism. A lot of people, you know, might be like, oh, I just need to be 100% essentialist. But what percentage of the time should we be shooting for to be effortless?
Well, don't be all like effortful and exhausting about effortless, you know, like let's not do that. I mean, look, let's just step. I love that question. I will answer it, but give it a little context.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, essentialism is about rethinking prioritization, and Effortless is about rethinking simplification. It's like, how can we make it simpler? And there are three basic ways that I've learned that we can, that there's very low hanging fruit for us to make things simpler, that we can gain a big reward. One of them is to simplify our state. A lot of us spend an enormous amount of our time burdened mentally, emotionally, physically, and we get to the point where we just think it's normal to be carrying these massive, unnecessary burdens. And in fact, I was just talking with Tim Ferriss on his podcast, and I asked him, it's related to this first idea of effortless state, that what percentage of your life have you spent, like of your mental and emotional energy, have you spent on holding grudges, on being angry? And he's like, oh, Greg, between like, say, ages 15 to 30, that period of my life, probably 60 to 70%, right? Which is unbelievable. If you were looking for something to make life a bit easier, you might not think about forgiving someone as being the answer. That might not, I mean, that would appear on almost no sort of life hack lists for productivity or to make life easier. You think about these things that produce a far smaller return on investment, 60 to 70% of your mental, emotional energy, unbelievable. And that's really the idea. It's certainly not about beating yourself up for not being in the effortless state, right? Like sure. That is itself not being in the effortless state. Of course. It's just about trying to come back into this moment. And I think the first thing I would say, the fastest single thing you can do is we'll start this practice. You say, every time I complain, criticize myself or others, I will say something I'm thankful for. That's it. When I started doing this, I'll tell you what I learned. I complain a lot more than I realized. And I think of myself as quite a positive person, quite, future oriented, can do, that sort of thing. But I still was amazed at how much I'm carrying. When you're complaining, all you're doing, really, when you're criticizing, all you're doing is making something that may be a challenge just harder. That's it. That's all that does for you, is it just takes the thing. It doesn't change the thing at all. It just makes it harder. Just adds burden to your life. The moment you do it, gratitude and fear cannot coexist. Gratitude, worry cannot coexist. Gratitude, anger cannot coexist. Like this state of gratitude is not to be underestimated. It is a complete game changer. It doesn't matter how powerful you think it is. I think it is far more powerful. We've played it even in our family where, somebody will be complaining about something. I remember my son was complaining, and we have a rule, not always, but okay, if you're fine, you complain, but now you tell me 3 things you're thankful for. And he's like, well, number 1, I'm really thankful that Dad wants to play this game. This was just a total attitude, and it made us all laugh. And so that was it. And then it said the other 2, and then we all started doing it. And I'm telling you, man, that says it all about gratitude, is that you can do it even with a bad attitude, and it's so powerful it still breaks through. You can have a daughter lose herself without any power to do anything about it, and there can still be a culture of optimism and goodness and light and hope around you. That whatever that is worth having a little more of in your life. And it will push out these other burdens. And suddenly it's like, yeah, man, what would it be like if every time we start worrying, we just said something we were thankful for? There's a metaphor that I came across that I like. I haven't ever done fly fishing, but it's a fly fishing hack, which is that if you put on Polaroid sunglasses when it changes the deflection of the water, the light on the water, so you can see underneath it, so you can see the fish. So the fish are already there, but you don't see it. And I just find that this idea, this practice of becoming, what if we were just grateful every single time we felt out of the effortless state? As soon as you feel out of it, hey, one thing I'm thankful for. And you see stuff that's everywhere. There's so much. And you no longer get consumed with the negativity of a situation you're in, or the frustration of something that you're in. And so then what happens, it's part of Barbara Fredrickson's theory, which is called broaden and build theory. Basically, whatever state you're in, it's not like things are going well, therefore I'm in a good state. That's what we normally think it is. Get good results, then I'll be happy, then my state will improve because I'll have what I want. But she says it's exactly the opposite, is that the state that you're in, as soon as you're in a positive state, what I'm calling an effortless state, your sense of optionality in the world increases. You see all these assets, see all these possibilities, and that has an effect on your own state, but also on the state of the relationships around you, because they immediately react to that positivity. And there's all these options between each other because you have a good feeling, a creative feeling, and that creates actual changes in the systems that support you, because your network increases and the relationships are stronger. And so it means that you are materially better prepared for the next problem that comes along. For us in our family culture, the next big problem that came along was the pandemic. As now we're dealing with the crisis of our daughter, and now the crisis that the whole world is dealing with as well. And what I saw, and I don't mean to say this sounds a bit so congratulatory probably, but what I was really struck by was that the culture in the family, because effortless state has a when you apply effortless state to team dynamics, it's culture. That's the word for it. We want an effortless culture, one that doesn't make things harder than they need to be. I noticed that there was just like this default setting within the culture. Everyone knew what to do without talking about it. We just knew to be grateful, knew to be, well, what can we do? And what are possible? Well, we can get out and exercise, and we're going to make a plan, and we're going to do these things. And it was like everybody just knew. I just didn't have the immediate impact of fear that I think otherwise it would have done. I feel like that's one very quick and extremely powerful way to just get back into the effortless state. Don't worry about percentages. Just the next time you feel out of it, just say something you're thankful for, and watch. I've just begun my journey with gratitude, and I've been in it for years, but I still feel like I'm scratching the surface.
I've heard people talk about gratitude a lot, but I think something that hit me a little differently this time reading your book was just I love diagrams, and I think just seeing the circle. There was a circle, which meant that it's somewhat finite, the amount of mental space that I have, and that gratitude could literally push out complaining and whatever. Like that clicked for me finally. I have this struggle with, like, to be real, though, this is how I feel. But I also know that there's a deeper realness inside of me that believes something else. So I have to tap into that and all that. But anyway,
no, but that's okay.
I like this. Yeah.
I like that you're being real about it, even in this conversation. Of course it is. We are so full. It isn't if you're not in the effortless state, you are being bad. It isn't. It's that thought alone is creating burden you don't need to have. That sense of self-criticism is so real. I just got an early copy of a book called Soundtracks by a friend of mine, John Acuff. And I mean, we're just all overthinkers. This is all within effortless, is the contrast to effortless state. We're already overthinking. And he says, which is a good transition for us to like these three areas in the book. And the second area is effortless action. And one of the things he says is if you're over, the solution to overthinking is not more thinking, it's to take action. And I really like that, because as you start to get into this more grateful, more centered place, you're in a better position to be able to even imagine how to simplify the action you're taking in life. And that's all I'm saying. It's like you simplify the internal state first, then you can start to simplify the processes and the work that you're doing just to make the action easier. And then that can, over time, create enough space for you to create and simplify the results, so that results ultimately can start coming back to you without you even putting any effort in, if you design your systems right. And so, yeah.
Voice of Influence listeners want to have a deep impact with the messages and the offerings that they contribute or bring forth in the world, as you would put it. But choosing or whittling down a message to its essential form is really not easy to do. Like, how did you come down to it's Essentialism? That's the book. That's the book I need to write. It's Effortless.
Okay, I like that. I mean, the process for me is a long one. It's a very language-oriented process where I am a titles first writer, and I obsess about the word, the actual title, for a long time, typically. I've gone through certainly 100 titles for Effortless, and the same for Essentialism. And with Essentialism, the path was realizing there was something I'd observed that I thought was disproportionately important. But when I started talking to people about it at first, I remember sharing with a manager at a tech company I was working with. I said, clarity. If you can just have clarity on your team, it just solves everything else. If you know what's essential as a team, and you know what we're really doing versus what we're not doing, if you know who's doing what, it just solves 80% of the other problems. It's an amazingly powerful tool. And she said, yeah, I think there's a lot of other stuff. it was in that moment that I thought, yeah, okay, I've just got to go and like find the words now, because I have observed this for years and years. I just don't have the language. And so it was all about trying to find a word to capture a single insight of something that I wanted to say and wanted to bring. And for a long time, I think this working title for Essentialism was The Story of Clarity. And so, so you sort of had a clear sense of something you want to say, but then you've got to do the work to go from there to how that word can be, that those ideas can be hearable and fresh to people. And I think that's the journey that often distinguishes, at least in my field of as a writer, books that have something that are true in it. You can't. These things are good. Yes, if we all did them, we'd be better. But we don't care. You go, oh yeah. It's like there are many books that get ignored because they didn't make the journey from the principle back to where people are right now in their lives, and how to find a way that makes that draw them in. And so, it's Stephen Covey once said to me, he said I get 20 books sent a week to me, and he said one of the challenges that I find is that most authors start with their own mind in mind, not the reader's mind in mind. And yes. So in my mind, that's the journey. Then you've got an idea, you want to say something, and then it's the journey from there all the way back to where people are. And really, that for me, all is about the title. It's the first thing anyone will ever hear about the idea. So to me, it's the most important thing to get right. And essentialism was, that was the best word that we could find for it. And the disciplined pursuit of less seemed to say it succinctly. Now with Effortless, similarly, that journey was all about, honestly, if I'm being frank about it, it was all about, don't write a rubbish book. Don't write a book that nobody wants to read. The temptation is huge, actually. Well, you don't want to write a book no one wants to read, but the temptation is that you just write a book because the agent wants you to, and the publishers are ready to, and even people that have read Essentialism are, hey, what's next? And so you've got an open door, but I was just so keen, and I don't know, we'll see yet. Sounds like you're on board, but we'll see what other people feel. But Effortless was about, I went through so many titles, but when I one day just had Effortless come to me, I just was like, oh, that's it. I knew it was it. And it had to do with that belief that for people, when they hear that word, now some people will have a reaction, oh, it's not realistic, whatever. I'm not saying 100%, but there is a group of people who want that. Who just want a little more effortlessness in their life, and they're just burdened right now. And I knew in that moment there was this very visual thing that happened for me as soon as I had that title, Effortless, was that everything I knew in life, like all these principles I wanted to teach, suddenly had a reversal process in my mind. It was like seeing the world through a completely, like, I don't know, taking something inside out. It was like an inside out view of the world. Because everything we're taught, work harder. If you want better results, you've got to work harder to get them. We all know, and that's true in lots of ways. But what if there's a whole nother truth that's opposite, that's also true? What if there's a whole nother level you can move to if you can just find a way to make things effortless? And so it's been very curated, careful process over a long period of time, because what I believe in both instances with both books is if you can find that right word, you have something that I think is almost magical. Its force goes on for a long, long time if you can get if you can play the right note. And I don't know, I could be wrong about all of this. The right note
that resonates with where people are.
Totally, it's the power of relevance, and it's got to connect with. If people don't want it, so many years ago they said to me, the church leader, they said to me, I say that I only give that because it's like not quite what you'd necessarily expect from the individual, but they just said, Greg, my advice to you is, and I just told them an idea for a book, by the way, and they said, my advice is don't write a book that nobody wants to read. And that's still the best advice I've ever been given about writing or communication or having an impact. Like, it's not whether the world needs what you want to say. It's whether the world wants what you are trying to say. And so you have to figure out a way to give people what they want, sell people what they want is the phrase, right? Sell people what they want, give them what they need. Mm-hmm. But if you can't do the first, there's no point in the second, because you don't have their attention. Jay Shetty said it this way to me. I thought this was a very clever summary. He said, some people just want to be entertained. So that's where he needs to start. Some people from that group will say, well, actually, I want to be educated as well. And then a smaller group will say, well, I want to be enlightened. But I thought those three were very nice, because what he's saying is, if you can't entertain them in the first place, you can't have a conversation to educate or to enlighten. Right. And so I think that's an important part of this this process. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Tim Ferriss. It's one of I loved your interview with Tim Ferriss, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the previous one. Yeah, thank you.
But I know that this is still an issue for many of us who are worried about disappointing others. But when we've chosen to say no to something, any particular tips that you can offer in terms of not disappointing others and dealing with that internally as well?
One thing I would say is, you don't want to come across as someone who's just complaining about, because I'm overwhelmed by all these things, right? Nobody wants to be a whiner. Hey, look at all these things. Yeah, I've got all this stuff. Can you believe it? But you do want to come across, I think, as a professional who cares about what really matters most. And so I think that looks more like, if we're talking about like a professional situation, it looks more like looking at everything you're working on, gathering it together in categories, figuring out which ones you think are most important, taking that list in a prioritized list to the person that who's managing you, and you're saying, okay, here are the most important things I'm working on. I don't think I can do all of these superbly well, but here are the things I think matter most, and I'd like to focus on. Can we get buy-in that these are really the things that are going to help push your agenda forward and be the best use of me? And that's why I didn't write a book called Noism, saying no to everyone and everything. It's essentialism. It's like, focus on what matters. I think that's one of the things that I would say. So one of the chapters in Effortless that I found personally most helpful in researching was a chapter on trust, and how effortless relationships can become if the trust is high enough. Mm-hmm. And how hard relationships get if the trust is low enough. I mean, if the trust is low and you say no, this that isn't going to work. If the trust is high enough, they say, hey, we need to do this. Well, yes, I'd like to do that. Here's what I'm thinking, maybe not. You can have the conversation. Yeah, actually, with some people, you just say no. Oh, no, I can't do that. This is what I think we should be doing. The relationship can withstand it because there's trust in the relationship. You understand each other's motives. You don't misjudge the motives. And there's a story about this in the book of Warren Buffett, who decides they're going to buy this massive, I don't remember now what it is, $17 billion something. Yeah. And the amount of work you would normally expect for that is months and months, could be many millions of dollars, just gathering, just making sure that everything that they say is true in the business, just looking through all of their contracts and looking through everything. And I mean, this could be just enormous. And that's why it was so breathtaking to read about it, and to go back and read the description of it by Warren Buffett in his annual report. He said the whole thing was done in a 2-hour meeting and a handshake. He said, we knew everything would be exactly as Walmart, that owned the company that was selling it, exactly as Walmart had said it would be, and it was. And I have had good experiences with trust in my life. I've had many times when high trust can work, but I am literally, at the time of this conversation, I can't get into the details of it, but I have just made one of the biggest financial decisions of my whole life. And I have never had an experience like it. It's become this new evidence that if the trust is high enough, it can be truly effortless. you don't have to go through the song and the dance. And I suppose what I would say is this, is that effortlessness as a principle, is effortless can be stacked in your life. And I loved what he was saying. It's like, as soon as you have one experience with this, makes something a little more effortless than it used to be. And then you go, oh, great, it worked. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
Let's do another thing. Let's make another thing effortless, and another thing effortless, and another thing effortless. And it's like, it works on so many layers, and it builds and grows, and you start to have experiences, and you start to trust it more, because it's not like, well, that's a nice idea. You go, wow, what if incredible things could become effortless? And suddenly what is possible in your life changes. And I am in the midst of this, absolutely, in multiple areas.
Choice is a huge piece of even admitting that you can choose something that is essential. That it's a huge piece of your message. It's a big thing that we talk about in agency, that feeling like I can do something about this. What do you see as the importance of, or how to help people to see that they have a choice, that they have agency, and let's say in particular inside of a team? If a leader is trying to lead a team and they want them to use their voice, they want them to have, show autonomous kind of thinking and whatnot. What do you see as a way for people to help them do that?
You are saying, how do you empower other people to take initiative?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, something else that's in this trust chapter in Effortless is his saying with Warren Buffett is that he has a rule when he's hiring people. And I call it now the 3 I's, because it's, first is integrity, the second is intelligence, and the third is initiative. He says if they don't have integrity, then the other 2 can hurt you. So I love that rule.
It's a great rule.
To me, I'm looking now whenever I'm hiring people, whenever I'm working with people, I'm saying, literally, I'm looking for 9 and 10, 9 and 10 integrity, 9 and 10 intelligence, 9 and 10 on initiative. And for me, I think initiative is like, yeah, I have to have people who show initiative, because effort is thinking, right? Like effort is mental exertion. It's physical exertion too, but really what effort means is that we're cognitively having to think about something. And as one of my favorite titles of a book is Don't Make Me Think. And that's what really, in a sense, as a leader of a team, that is what you want, is people who are thinking for you, thinking that, taking initiative based on good, sensible ideas, so that you can make progress without you having to push things forward. So I think one answer to the question is hiring. You got to hire people who have the 3 I's. Some people are more comfortable with taking initiative than others. So if you hire that they're already strong in that, then you don't have to try and change somebody into something else if that's something that you value. So I think that there is like a hiring answer to your question. Then I think the second part of it is to create a high trust agreement. And even if you don't feel like you have time to actually sit down and create sort of a formal written document, you can do it even audibly with somebody, where a high trust agreement, the point of this is that in every relationship, manager, employee, whatever, there's actually 3 relationships. There's the person A, there's person B, and then there's the agreement, the structure, the system, and that's often very invisible. Mm-hmm. And so then we tend to blame each other if there are struggles, or the trust is lower. We tend to think, well, you must be acting in a way that's not appropriate. Maybe it's me, and self-blaming. And I find that more often than not, it's actually the system is not been, we haven't focused on it. We haven't looked at the agreement. What are we all? And so it becomes very messy. And so in messiness, people can do all sorts of things that irritate each other because they haven't got clear about the understanding. So a high trust agreement is really getting clear about what you're trying to accomplish. the result that you're agreeing on, the resources that you want to make sure are available, the time that you're going to come back and have accountability together, that all of this is explicitly clear. So then people can choose. They could even choose at that point, well, that's not for me.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. And you go, okay, well, that would be good for us both to know. Even if that's a little awkward or even very awkward, it's probably better for us to know now than it is for 5 years from now or 10 years of frustration for everybody involved. But if you can get clear about that, then it really liberates people to be able to take action and to take, to take initiative confidently, because they know where the boundaries are, they know what they're trying to achieve and what they're not. It sets them up to be able to win. So I think it's hire someone you really trust, produces effortless results for you many, many times. Hiring the person you don't trust will produce effort for you and problems many, many times. So it's a very high leverage thing to do, is to get those people right. And then once you have the right people, is to have a high trust agreement. So you're not in the business of command and control.
Yeah. You know what I just heard you say? I heard you say that if people do not see that there are two choices, then they can't exercise that ability to choose. If they do not know what the choices actually are. So actually knowing what the goal is, what the decision is, what the rules are, or the values, or whatever we're agreeing to, without knowing that, they can't make a choice.
Yeah, that's right. There's an old story. I've never been able to find an actual citation that it's true, but it's a story about children who are playing in a playground next to the road, and they all played close to the school because it's this fast highway and it's like terrifying. And then the school puts up a fence between the road and the school, and now the children play fully to the edges. And the idea is that clear boundaries increase empowerment, because what you really want is here's the playground. This is where you can play anywhere here. And we tend to think it's the other way around, where we don't want to have any boundaries, but then we have to control people all the time. Oh, well, don't do that, do this, and they don't know how to move, or I don't know, and then that's just entirely awful for everyone involved. It creates bad behavior on both parts. So the high trust agreement, I think, makes a big difference to that.
So one of the questions that I've been asking people as they come onto the podcast is, that, and our friends around the world know that this is a really divided nation right now. What could essentialism do to speak to or help heal some of essentialism and effortless, to help heal where we're at or move us forward in some way?
I have just begun working on the next book. And this next book is just dead on for what you're describing. I basically think that we've been taught as overachievers how to speak, write, read, but almost none of us have had formal education in listening and elite listening. It's just a huge gap in our skill set. And that produces actually two problems. One is that when people say, oh yeah, you need to listen more, what we conjure up in our minds are what I would call weak listeners. That is people who don't talk much. So therefore, oh, they must be good listeners because they're, look at them, yeah, they're pleasant, they don't interrupt people, and so on. And as overachievers, we tend to go, oh, I don't think I need to do more of that. That doesn't seem like the right way forward. It's actually because there's two problems with listening. One is being this weak listener where you're not listening, you're just not speaking. Then there's you're not listening because you're speaking. And then there's this other thing. I don't know, maybe for language, and I'm still working on language for sure, but maybe radical listening, where actually you would interrupt somebody if you're really listening. You do interrupt for clarification because your job is to seriously understand, and there's a whole series of skills. And I've been working on this book before I worked on Effortless, before worked on Essentialism. It's a 20-year journey. It's something I've felt a very deep feeling about. And I just needed to spend those years trying to develop the ability. But it's an ability that starts within. It's a very inside-out process. You have to learn some skills for internally, just how to do it and why it matters. And so there's internal, but then it moves into interpersonal, the behaviors, the skills. But there's also like team and organizational and even societal listening, where there's some really fascinating research and examples of people that are doing this. And if you can get not that artificial listening, that's like, that may be half your influence. But this other radical listening is like 10x influence. That's how I think about it. And if you think about the greatest influencers, they were radical listeners. They're unbelievable. I mean, you look at somebody like Oprah, right? I mean, her ability wasn't that she could pick a book that everybody wanted. It wasn't, my influence is so big that I am going to say, read this book and everyone will read it. That's what we thought was happening. But if you just talk to her, like what she has said about this is that she was always asking this question: what would 10% of my viewers really, really want to read? So she's listening. That's advanced listening. She said for an hour a day after the show ended, the Oprah Winfrey Show, she would listen to the audience, ask questions. That was how she said that the show continued to be successful, was because I was always in getting the pulse of the audience, and I utilized them to be able to stand in for everybody else out there that I couldn't go and physically meet. I mean, this is what we're talking about. There's a whole series of skills and abilities about radical listening. Increases your influence incredibly. And it's something we just seriously, I don't know anybody that's been taught how to do this. I don't know any system that teaches it. I don't know anywhere to go for it. I don't know anyone in any business school that's had a class in it. And so as a result, what happens is that we're basically really bad at this because you don't know how to do it. So this, I think, could help with the stalemate because we're just not listening to each other in the way I'm describing. We're just not understanding each other. And it just creates this bigger polarization of society where you just judge each other harder and harder, harsher and harsher. You're an American. Well, you're an American. Well, then you're to be distrusted. You need to be destroyed. And this is actually literally is what civil war is built on, is that there's a tipping point and people just go and conflict begets conflict. And it's not because actually you're that far apart. It's because you just feel more and more misunderstood.
You may not be able to wait longer than 18 months for your next book, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, there's this. I certainly feel a sense of urgency with it. It actually feels so far like the easiest thing I've ever worked on writing wise. And I think it's because it's just had this gentle, long journey before it, and it just time feels just really, really right to start working on it. So this is peculiar. We are now talking about a book that isn't even written on the day that Effortless came out, but you have drawn it out of us, and now you've had an insider's look. It's been so nice to be with you.
Thank you so much, Greg. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I know that our listeners have as well. So blessings to you. Good luck with the launch. And I'm absolutely confident there's going to be a great response because people need this so bad right now. So thank you.
From your lips to God's ears. Thank you, Andrea.